Yo, yo, yo. Hey, guys, welcome back to another awesome edition of the Best Practices Show podcast. Our goal here is to bring you great information to help you improve your practice and your life. And we're going to do exactly that with an old friend of ours, Dr. Christopher Phelps. And we're going to be talking about the power of influence. And today, he's taken on a new role. And he's going to show us how we can unlock the power of influence in our dental practice. Please listen up. I hope you guys enjoy it, and we'll see you soon. Hey guys, welcome back to the Best Practices Show podcast. You know the jam. I say that all the time, but the jam around here is to bring the best thinkers, teachers, speakers, coaches, influencers anywhere in dentistry to help you create a better practice and a better life. And they share a lot of great information. And today I've got a special guest. He's been a returning guest many times, and now he's got a new role. And he's been a good friend of mine for a long time and always gives us some great insight. Dr. Christopher Phelps. And I'm going to wait to share what he's up to next. But Chris, thanks for being on, brother.
Awesome. Thank you, Kirk, for having me on. And I promise I left the jelly at home, so we're only bringing the jam.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. I like that a lot. Now, you and I have had an interesting journey. I've watched you become a serial entrepreneur. And actually, I knew about you a long time. I always tell this story. Like, when I started bringing you on the podcast, people were like, oh, I went to dental school with him. He used to like create the Cliff Notes. So we all got through dental school because you became a serial entrepreneur before you even graduated from dental school. And I don't think you can help yourself. You just got to keep creating things, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, it's like a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to start here. Let's do a simple bio on who you are and what you've done up to this point, and then we can lead right into what you're up to next.
Yeah, definitely. From North Carolina originally. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina currently. Went to dental school down at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale. Graduated back in 2003, so just over 20 years ago. Hard to believe that much time has passed. And you're right, in dental school, that was my first entrepreneurial business, where I sold copies of my notes, right? And totally blew the curve out of the water by helping bringing everybody else up as a result. But I think what I realized, that was the first evidence of where, when I got a problem in front of me, then for me to understand it, I really had to try to simplify it as much as I could. And by simplifying it, and that's how I got down all of my notes down to 5 pages of front and back paper, for every test we did, I realized, well, the solution worked pretty good for me. It might work for others. And hence people started buying that notes. And so I realized now, once I got out of school, I built multiple fee-for-service dental practices in Charlotte. I had 4 at one time. And again, realizing that, hey, maybe I wasn't just destined to sit in this chair. Not that I didn't enjoy it. I mean, I still see patients on Tuesdays. I still love talking to my patients. I learned some of my best stuff from talking to my patients. But these activities and actions kept drawing me further and further away from the chair. So I eventually started selling off those practices to start freeing up my time to build other dental companies. And that was the next iteration of things. And building a company like Golden Goose Scheduling or Dental Membership Direct for membership plans that I wrote a book on a few years back, or practice coaching with Sunrise Dental Solutions. I mean, in essence, I realized early on, again, when I had these problems in my practices, once I was able to really solve them and create a simplified process for that, then I realized, hey, I wonder if this is going to work for others. And knock on wood, so far it has, which has been good. So I keep repeating the same process and the same formula over and over again, which is also kind of unique. But now, one of my big things that I've been known for years has been on communication and the science of influence and persuasion, something that had a profound impact on my life when I kind of sold my 2 best dental practices. So I, stupidly sold the highest profit ones, lowest debt, highest revenue. And I took over the 2 worst ones, highest debt, least revenue. one of which was a brand new cold start office, was collecting $35,000 a month, but costing me $75,000 a month in expense. Well, of course, you don't have to be a math major to realize that's not a good check to write every month. When you've got other practices and other partners, that's an investment, right? When you've got one other practice and one partner, that's a problem. So I had these two challenges and all these fires going on in my two practices with my patients, not doing the reviews for us, not referring people, not coming back for treatment, not showing up for their appointments. My team, it was like, why is it always that when the cat was away, meaning me, the mice would play? Why do I have to keep telling my team to do stuff instead of them just doing it? Right. So looking at behavioral issues there, my associate doctors trying to influence them to better communicate with their patients. And so I really couldn't put my finger on the root cause behind these little fires, but they were getting hotter. They were warming up, if you will, because fires don't just go away, right? Especially if you ignore them. So that was when I was fortunate somebody had invited me to hear a keynote presentation by a guy, a behavioral psychologist named Dr. Robert Cialdini. And without realizing it in that moment, it literally was going to change my life forever. Okay. And one of those principles in particular, his 6 principles of persuasion that he talked about and wrote his original book on 40 years ago, by the way. Okay. A book that Warren Buffett and some of the top 100 US CEOs have voted the #1 business book of all time. His Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion book. But of these 6 principles, one of them called the consistency principle was my light bulb that was like, oh my God, that one right there. That one is the root cause behind all of these problems I'm having. Okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. I need to go learn from the master. So it's kind of like, I forget if it was Buddha or somebody once said, when the student is ready, the master will appear. And that's what it kind of felt like to me. So I got to go train under Dr. Cialdini. He took me under his wing, and over a year, got to study all these behavioral science research stuff, and became what we call a Cialdini method certified trainer. So a certification where I got to learn directly from him on how to use these principles in my communication, but also in my practices. So I kind of went back and used my 2 practices as my laboratory for the next 3 years in experimenting, looking at a behavioral science research study and going, well, it kind of worked over here in that scenario for them in this study. Maybe that would work over here for me in this scenario. And lo and behold, it did. And what was crazy was the growth we had over those 3 years, which again, we're talking 2008 during the housing crisis, right? So one of the last big economic crisis we've had. And yet my practices were able to grow $1 million each 2 straight years in a row after that, when more dentists went bankrupt those 3 years than in the history of dentistry, kind of thing. So I felt very fortunate that I was able to tap into the answer in my mind on what people are really using to make their decisions, not the excuses we hear after the fact, like it's too expensive or my insurance doesn't cover it.
Right. Yeah. I want you to go a little bit deeper in this book that you're referring to. And I didn't know that there was a 7th principle of influence. I'll just tell the listeners right now, it's one of the most important business books you'll ever read. And it's not weird. It's not, it's just really how humans work, right? Can you give us some background on this? How did this evolve? How did it develop? How did he create this science?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. He was he's a professor at Arizona State University, and now we're flashing back over 40 years ago, and he needs a research project. Right. And he was sitting at his desk at ASU, and he's got this box of chocolate bars sitting in front of him, like bars you'd buy individually, somebody doing a fundraiser or whatnot. And he had bought this whole box. And what confused him was 2 things. Number one, why he bought the whole box, but number 2, because he actually hates chocolate. So he's like, how did somebody influence me to buy something that I actually hate? And I got a whole box of them. He didn't just buy one, he bought the whole thing. So he said, there was something there that I'm missing. Something influenced me to do something I normally wouldn't do. And that's what got him curious. Okay. And so he decided to do something bold. He left the laboratory, the academic world, if you will, briefly, and went out for 2.5 years pretending to be a potential employee and joined all these different sales training processes in different industries, trying to study what are the best of the best using to influence us. Was there a pattern, whether they knew it or not? And, he did everything from selling door-to-door vacuum cleaners to he was the guy that took your family photos at Christmas for your Christmas card at Olin Mills back then. He sold used cars. He went through the new car sales training process. He worked in high-end ad agencies in New York and LA, to see from a marketing standpoint, how are people trying to influence us to get stuff done or want their product. He even interviewed cult church leaders, right, of all people, to see how they're influencing people to do what some of us might consider as an abnormal behavior. So influencing people with some, we might think is interesting behavior to do certain things. And what he did find was there was a pattern. There were, at the time, these 6 key things that stood out to him. And that's what he decided to do his research on and prove these 6 principles of persuasion. And it was only just a few years ago that he realized, out of all of them, that there's a 7th principle. And he wrote a book called Presuasion. It was his the latest book that came out a few years back. And he introduced this 7th principle of persuasion called unity as well. So now we've got 2 fundamental things that we can use to influence people our direction. This idea of persuasion, what can you do before they even get in front of you that creates a mindset that influences them to want to say yes to your request, versus persuasion is when they're in that moment with us. Okay, so we can persuade them before and persuade them in that moment. So I call this the 2 most powerful 1-2 punches to influence people to yes.
Yeah, I love it. So I want you to answer the question people might like, why is this important for a dentist? I know the answer, but I want you to speak to it because you are a dentist. You work with a lot of dentists. And if a dentist is listening, why is this important?
This is extremely important. Why? Because when you start making your strategies around what people actually use to make their decisions, the majority of the time, instead of the excuses we hear afterwards, that's when you start to get things done. So in my example, for instance, this idea of consistency states that when people make a real commitment, take a stand on an issue, put skin in the game, whatever, but when they really commit, there's a lot of external and internal influence on them to follow through and do what they say they were going to do, to be consistent in their thoughts, actions, and beliefs. So this idea of if people commit, then they do. Well, then suddenly it became very clear why I wasn't seeing the behavior in my team, in my patients, and in my doctors. Well, I was the crazy one to think they would do because they didn't actually commit. So once I realized how to get better commitments out of them, all of their behavior changed. Okay. And patients started saying yes and referring and doing treatment. My team, I could actually become independent of the chair. I could step out of the office. And when the cat was away, the mice didn't play because of those same commitments. So it literally could change all of your worlds and put you in a much better situation than where you are currently.
Yeah. Take us through the principles of influence and give us a little light on what each one of them is.
Definitely. So, kind of one of the original ones, this one's like biblical. It's called reciprocity. It's as old as time, right? And it's this idea that if someone gives you a gift of value and of significance, this obligation is kind of created inside of you where you feel like you got to give back in kind, right? Somebody does you a favor, you feel like you got to do them a favor. If they send you a birthday present, right, you're probably going to send them a birthday present. So when we're given, we feel we got to give back in kind. The next principle is called liking, right? Liking. We like to do business with people we like. It's as simple as that. But at the same time, we don't like to do business with people we don't like, right? So if there's no relationship present there, if we don't like that person, or we don't think they like us, then we're not likely to say yes to what they're going to say to us or ask. So liking is important along with reciprocity. What's interesting, out of the reciprocity realm, this new principle called unity has now been developed. That's the 7th principle. But all 3 of those, unity, reciprocity, and liking, really help build relationships with people. So unity is just that. It's not a you versus me situation with unity. It's a we. Okay. We are the same unit. Okay. We're not 2 separate individuals. So I know, Kirk, your daughter's at UNC Chapel Hill, and I went to UNC Chapel Hill. So we are Tar Heels.
We
right?
are.
We tend to rally around things that unite us like that, like culture, religion, your geographic location, your favorite sports teams, all of those kinds of things. So we are Tar Heels, right? And we're unitized by that. So unity is a powerful, powerful principle because of that. We've got social proof, okay, which is probably the most powerful of the principles right now with online influence. Right. And Facebook is a classic example of social proof in action, where it's one of the few times you could get on a platform and see what everybody in the world is up to and thinking about all at the same time. So with social proof, it's all about we are heavily influenced by the evidence of what others around us have done or said or are doing as well. So if the crowd is going one direction or thinking a certain direction, there's a pull for us to do the same. At the same time, the other end of the pendulum we've got from social proof is authority. So with authority, we actually still need credible, trustworthy experts to tell us what we should do. Because the truth of the matter is, we don't have time to be an expert in everything. So honestly, if I have a plumber that comes to my house and says, I need a new toilet, okay, I don't know anything about plumbing, so I guess I'm buying a new toilet. So it's not that we couldn't be experts in everything, but because we don't have time, we do need these credible, trustworthy people to tell us what we should do to be our shortcuts. So we still, even in this day and age where we've lost some of the authority's luster, we still need them and lean on them to guide us and tell us what we should do. You've got consistency, which I mentioned before. That's the commitment principle. If people commit, then they tend to do. So if they're not doing in your world, back it up and ask yourself, maybe it's I'm not getting the right commitments out of them to do so.
Right.
And change the commitment could change the behavior. And of course, last but not least, scarcity, right? Scarcity is probably the one most people are familiar with. But by definition, scarcity is about resources. So if resources around you are truly dwindling or about to disappear, then that's going to uber motivate you to do something about it. You're going to want that thing more and you're going to do more to get it, even if you didn't want it before you found out it was about to be scarce. So this reminds me of like when we're about to have a big storm and next thing you know, there's no more bread and milk at the grocery store or during COVID and we didn't have any toilet paper, right? And where did all the paper products go? So when we know something could run out, man, does that motivate us to want that thing and do more to get it.
Yeah, I could go off on a riff on each one of these, but scarcity does motivate me quite a bit. And I think of the two instances. Number one is restaurants. If they say, hey, I only have one table left, I got to have it. And then also if you book through Expedia or anything, they'll say three tickets left at this price. You're like, oh my gosh, that's like dirt cheap. So that definitely and you could see how these will all show up. Now it's funny that you say consistency because we've had several podcasts on this. Consistency is probably the number one problem I've had in my life for the last 15 years. And we didn't realize the power of consistency, like setting a course and sticking to it, doing what you say you're going to do, showing up at the same time, having a meeting that works. It's amazing how all of these principles, when you isolate them, have power, but talk about the combination of them.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And what's interesting about this is that, we're not making this stuff up. We're not imposing these principles into a situation. They're actually naturally there. That's what's cool about this. Okay. So we're not inventing or reinventing anything. All we are is just recognizing, hey, in this situation, I could use consistency. I could get a better commitment out of this person. Or there is some social proof evidence that I could use that others have already bought this thing. So maybe this one person may want to say yes because of that. So, and when you can find multiple principles present in a situation, that's when they really amplify each other's power, right? And each of them has a pull on us. So as I like to say, I kind of think of when somebody's trying to decide yes or no, there's like these scales in our mind, the yes, no scales, right? And if we don't give them anything to weigh down the yes side, right, to help them make this decision, they still need something to fall back on to decide. And that's when it usually comes down to what's the price and does my insurance cover it? Because we didn't give them these other things. We didn't leverage these other principles that were present when we could have, but they still have to decide. So they fall back on the only thing they do understand at that point. What's left?
Right. Well, one of my questions as I look at it, how much of this is emotion and logic? Like I'm guessing that influence would be heavily weighted towards emotion versus logic. And you're dealing with a different hemisphere of the brain, aren't you?
Yeah. So in essence, logic and emotion tend to come into the kind of more system one area of the brain, meaning conscious thought, right? And conscious awareness, so to speak. Where these principles lie is actually below that surface in the subconscious realm. So that when these things are present in a situation and we are exposed to them, let's say you're walking up to a building for the first time and 50 people come running out of that building, screaming in terror and running in a different direction. Okay. Instantly, it bypasses rational thought and emotion. And your pull is to follow the crowd. Whoa. Yeah, right. What's going on? Something could be danger, it could be whatever. So ideally, sometimes these principles will generate an emotion after the fact, but what leads to the action is totally subconscious. It automatically, you want to say yes and follow. And then later, then you'll think about it and analyze it and come up with a why.
Yeah, this is so cool. So I know this would be important as a dentist, would use these principles, obviously, in improving their communication with patients, but talk about the team. How, Chris, can you really implement this and use this as a team? And I know you're going to talk a little bit about your new role and what you guys do, but talk about how this would work with my team.
Oh, this is huge with the team because again, it goes back to getting those commitments out of people. So there's three kind of commitments we can get. We can get active commitments, we can get voluntary commitments out of people, and we can get public commitments out of people. Each of these is important in their own right. Voluntary commitment is very simple. People have to feel like they have a choice in the matter, right? If they don't really feel like they have a choice, that's when they feel like they've been coerced, intimidated, forced to do it, right? I mean, we learned as little kids, we don't like people to tell us what we should do for that reason, because it takes away our sense of control. It takes away this idea that we have a choice in the matter. So just by providing choice, we avoid the coercion, intimidation, the manipulation side of things. And we're on the influence and persuasion side because that's all it is. It's all about a choice. But once they choose, now they're more committed because of that choice. So I'm all about giving people a this or that choice. Which would you prefer? Right. And every time they make one of those choices, they're making more and more of a commitment to get it done. Public commitments are fairly straightforward, especially with the team. If everybody knows you said you were going to do something, well, there's a lot of influence on you to follow through and do with what you said you were going to do, because you don't want others out there in our interactions, in our network, our community, family, to view your thoughts and actions and beliefs as being inconsistent, right? If you think about it, just think about that word consistency and its opposite, inconsistency, right? I mean, there's no positive word in the English language to describe someone who doesn't do what they say they're going to do.
Right.
We get some nasty names for those people. So that's kind of the social influences. We don't want others to view us with one of those negative words. Okay. But the internal pressure is there as well. You don't want to view yourself as being inconsistent in your own thoughts, actions, and beliefs. So it's actually one of the few principles that hit you from outside and from within, which to me, they're all important, but consistency is probably one of the most powerful because of that. So getting public commitments, if everybody knows in a group setting, hey, Jill, you said you were going to get that done for the team. Where are we? And you're back in a group setting discussing it, that accountability alone is going to get more people to move.
Yeah.
And then, of course, our last one there is we've got voluntary, we've got public commitments. Is the active commitments are number one, like verbal commitments. You got to tell somebody you're going to do it. And that's just as simple as changing a statement, like on the telephone, instead of please call us if you can't make your appointment, to a commitment statement. Will you please call us if you can't make your scheduled time?
Right.
And as soon as they say yes, automatically that person is more likely to show, or at least call you if they can't make it, than the other person when you just said, please call us if you can't be here.
Right.
Right. But just that, I mean, there's one study alone about a popular restaurant in Chicago where asking that one question, will you please call us if you can't make your restaurant reservation, decreased no-shows from 30% to 10.
Mm-hmm.
Just from one active commitment. So getting active, telling people you're going to do stuff, getting them to write stuff down. And then, of course, the highest active commitment is effort. Anytime you put time and money into it, you're more than likely going to follow through and do what you said you were going to do.
Yeah. Now, if somebody doesn't have any experience with this information, they might hear it in the wrong way. And I'm just going to speak to that. They might be thinking, well, you're talking about a science that helps you get what you want from people. And I think you can speak to this. There's a recent study saying that 61% of dentists will face the biggest challenge they will have for the rest of their careers will be finding, keeping, developing great people. And I know you well enough, and I know this information. How much of this is about getting people to do what you want them to do versus like creating a great culture of people that know what this is all about?
Yeah, it is exactly about creating that culture. And what's interesting is I didn't hide the fact that I was trying to influence my team from them.
Right.
In fact, they were all trained on these principles. We all were speaking the same language because you're right. It had to be part of our culture. right? You're always trying to influence someone in some interaction with them, whether you realize it or not. Okay. How we differentiate this and how we can stand behind it is, are we doing this from an ethical standpoint? And so that's one of the big things we teach at the Institute is the ethical use of these things. Because just because I know I can influence a person down a path, should I?
Right.
Right. How do
Right.
you?
Well, I could speak to all seven of these. I mean, I have four kids and an amazing wife at home, and I could see the use of all of these,
Oh, yeah.
when it comes to something they really want to do, or everybody else is doing this. I'm the only kid that's not going to be able, you're not letting me do this type of a thing. I see the reciprocity. I see the liking. I see the we. I see the social proof. I see the authority. All of these things are natural communication components. And I think the first piece is just kind of educating yourself around what they are. And then how do we better, utilize them, right?
That's it. That's it. Step one is always, do you, recognize that they're present in a situation. And sometimes that's the hardest because you're like, wait a minute, I feel like there's something here, but which principle is it? So, Cialdini in his book, he talks about he wants us to be the detective, right? The sleuth of influence to figure out, well, what principle is present in the situation organically that I can tap into and bring to the surface.
Right.
And, one of the ways we know we can do this ethically is this just for my advantage and not the other person's? Is this for their advantage and not for my benefit? Or is this really a benefit for us both? Right? Do we both generally benefit by getting a yes in the situation? Well, if so, then we can be objectively confident that we're on that ethical side of the line.
All right. I love it. Now, you use the term influence activate. Explain that. What does that mean? And how do you maintain that long term?
Yeah, and that's just it. So influence is around you, whether you see it or not, right? Once you start to recognize these things are present because you've been trained in them, then you can activate them in a situation. You can bring them to the surface. You can tap into their power. For instance, if I'm talking to a patient about different treatment options and I'm saying, hey, you could do this partial, you could do this bridge, or you could do this implant. Well, if I know and there's genuine facts to back up that the majority of my patients choose an implant option, well, then I would do wise in that moment to realize that that's the time I should present that. Hey, here's these three options, and let's start with the implant option. Well, and by the way, this is the one the majority of my patients choose. So maybe it might be the one for you, right? So just adding that little bit of flavor to it, that social proof, and letting people know automatically is going to influence more people who are unsure. Maybe that should be the best option for me as well.
Yeah. And again, using them ethically and honestly, because no one's going to be able to call you out more than the chairside assistant that's watching you communicate this, right?
Exactly. And that's why I did with our team, that was one of our exercises, was we tracked everything, right? So we had to have a firm foundation and the team had to be confident that we're using these things truthfully and in an ethical way. So when I told my patients, and I had a sign at checkout that said that 74% of our patients choose to pay their portion in full today at the time of service. We appreciate you doing the same. And they saw that big old sign at checkout, right? I backed that up and my team was confident in that because we tracked counter collections for months trying to see what is the statistic, right? Is that true? Do the majority pay in full or do we have to bill everybody, right?
Right.
When we found it was 74%, then we could feel confident reporting that statistic because it was a true fact. But because I reported that fact, what do you think happened to that number?
Went up.
Went up. And then finally, after a few months, it capped out at 96%.
That's pretty high.
So now I got 96% of my patients paying in full their portion today. And we didn't have to ask them one thing. All they had to do was be influenced by the sign in front of them. And as they were checking out and they'd read the sign, it took them from waving, I'll see you next time, and waving goodbye to pulling the checkbook and the wallet out saying, all right, what do I need here? What do you take?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is so great. As always, I love having you on just to educate about anything. We're going to take some of these apart in future episodes, but I want you to talk about your new role and then how you guys work with dentists. Like, how does it work? What does it look like? Your new role, you're the CEO now? Is that?
So
Okay.
I'm the U.S. CEO for Dr. Cialdini's Institute, which we just call the Cialdini Institute. In the past, to get this kind of training, he kind of kept the information scarce. So you had to come to a certified trainer like myself to learn about this material. And then you either came to one of my workshops or you hired me to come into your office and train your team, kind of thing. Well, given there was only 12 of us in the entire world, it's hard to spread the language of influence to the masses that way, right? It just is. So Dr. Cialdini is 79 years old this year, and he's decided that the Cialdini Institute, is going to be his legacy project. So why force people to come to us when now he spent like almost 2 years in the recording studio filming 10 hours of content where now you can learn the principles, what activates these things, what turns them on in a situation, and kind of what amplifies their power, kind of the gas you can throw on the fire. Now you can learn it directly online from Dr. Cialdini directly, self-paced as you go, which is really cool. So the education is now there. We've got opportunities to where you can learn application as well. So the best way to learn application of the principles is to put you in a mastermind group, right? And so that's what we do. Bi-monthly mastermind sessions where you're there with others to teach you how to use this stuff and how to apply it for your situation. And we even have opportunities where you can work with somebody like myself to help customize that application specifically for your situation, which is kind of cool. So kind of wherever you are on the spectrum of just, number one, learning the knowledge, number two, applying the knowledge, and number three, applying it specifically to your situation. We now got some opportunities to help people out there.
Yeah, I love it. And if you're listening to the podcast, Chris, I'm going to have you tell people where to go, and we'll post links. But before we do that, give us some final thoughts. Wrap this with a bow. How, what we chatted about today and how important it is to the future of a dentist.
Yeah. So I can't underscore how important these things are. There's a reason why the book's 40 years old. Okay. I mean, think about this. What book do you know that's 40 years old and the information is still relevant today? Number one, or number two, prevalent everywhere, right? They've never been more important than they are today, because the reason these things work on us and influence us is because we are so distracted. Our brain has too many things to focus on, too many things on its to-do list, right? Too much stimuli, too much things we're exposed to, thanks to the advent of the iPhone, okay? And how many marketing messages and social media content are we exposed to on a given basis? So in essence, our brain has realized it doesn't have time to sift through it all to make a decision. So the more distracted it gets and the more distracted we get, the more we lean on these things to decide.
Right.
So even though, technology, so to speak, is supposed to simplify certain things in our life, can't we all agree that it's made it also more complex?
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
So the more complex things are, that's when we simplify with these principles. So if you don't understand these things, then now's the time to get into it, because they're going to be the main reason why we're deciding moving forward. And so if you haven't built your practice systems around these things, well, that's a huge opportunity you're bungling. And then you'll be left wondering why people aren't saying yes.
Yeah. So good. So do me a favor, share with our listeners where they can go to find out. Where do I start, Chris? Give me a starting point.
So the easiest place is to come to the website. It's Cialdini.com, and we'll have to put that in the show notes because nobody can spell his name correctly. Mm-hmm. So Dr. Cialdini, it's Cialdini.com. So you don't have to put in www, just Cialdini.com. You can email me directly, Chris, CHRIS, at Cialdini.com. And I'll be more than happy to walk you through all of the options that we have. Okay, because there's some significant ones, both on the training aspect and video trainings on application of these things as well.
Awesome, buddy. Well, as always, thanks for coming on, brother. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kirk.
Yeah, well, stick around while we say goodbye to everybody else. But thank you guys for listening to the Best Practices Show. At the very least, please read Cialdini's books. They are fantastic, and they're required reading for not only just business, but life too. It's excellent. You'll get a better understanding. So we're going to post links. If you're not taking notes, don't worry. This is how we do it. We take notes for you. So if you're listening on, Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, Amazon, whatever you're listening to, you can flip up to the show notes. You're going to see a link to what Chris mentioned, and you can click on it. It'll take you right there. And I highly encourage you to check it out. So make sure you do that. Keep sending us suggestions. I'm going to have Chris back, and we're going to take some of these principles apart and show you exactly how they work in your practice in future episodes. But until we see you guys next time, or you hear from us next time, keep watching or keep listening to the Best Practices Show. You guys enjoy your day.